Examine a range of British women's magazines and analyse the ways women are represented in the advertisement and story content. To what extent are women represented as submissive within the home and sexualised, or are they shown to be empowered and have a life outside of the family and home? Can we mark contemporary representations as an advancement? For this presentation, I'll be giving an introduction to the topic. I'll then give some brief background information of women's magazines and the magazine industry. Afterwards, I'll discuss the potential worry of representations of women in magazines, and then I'll talk about a possible move to empowerment. I'll then give some magazine examples to reinforce my points, and I'll close the argument with a conclusion. Today, women's magazines cover a wide range of topics, such as beauty, fashion, style and relationships, to political and public matters. As a result, they're incredibly popular. For example, in 2014, Cosmopolitan magazine had a circulation of 229,390. Some theorists, such as Hermes, argue that women's magazines are another platform for women to be repressed and trivialised, making them passive consumers as a result, whilst theorists such as Budgeon and Curry argue that women's magazines can attract attention to important topics. Furthermore, women can be active consumers of magazines, making their own post-feminist choices. According to Go Yates, women's magazines can often be seen as a key platform for creating stereotypical feminine identities. Classically, feminist critiques of the media industries portray women's magazines as ideologically manipulative. The women's magazine industry is seen to create communications that circulate ideas that serve feminine identities. Thus, as a result, there is no room for flexibility of personal expression under this feminine stereotype. Early feminist accounts of women's magazines were concerned that representations of women were creating distorted ideals, pressuring women to follow them. Instead, they argued that women's magazines needed to insert more positive images in order to remould the classical representation of women. According to Frieden, women's magazines could be seen as problematic due to the fact that they didn't assist in creating gender equality. Due to the strong reputation of magazines, Frieden argues that they became a key aspect in helping women to form their identities. This meant that the messages conveyed by magazines could at times have a strong meaning for the consumer. Therefore, considering the fact that women's magazines were deemed to create restrictive ideas for feminism, this could be considered to be detrimental to forward-thinking ideas for women's identities. It's worth noting here that those behind the production of magazines were also seen in a negative light to the women's movement. The worry was that, instead of women creating their own identities, they were being restricted by highly structured codes in women's magazines that were encouraging them to feel a particular way about their bodies, as well as political viewpoints and topics of interest. Women's magazines held, and still hold, a vast amount of power in terms of influence. Here, the potential dangers of the representations in magazines today become evident. For instance, today it's very rare to see a plus-size model on the front of a popular magazine. Instead, the main consensus tends to centre on slim, sometimes underweight women who fit a particular beauty ideal. In February 2015, American magazine Sports Illustrated used their first plus-size model for a bikini campaign, breaking the magazine's history. However, it could be critiqued that, like fashion trends, body types go through trends. Thus, rather than the industry becoming more accepting of curves and less stereotypical body types, instead, perhaps they're simply in style, and this is what will sell magazines, broadening the audience support. So I guess we could ask the questions whether curves are in and athletic bodies are out, or are we really moving towards the acceptance of all types of beauty? So at this point, it could be argued that women's magazines promote restrictive beauty standards. However, it can also be claimed that due to the high circulation of magazines in the industry, this could further explain the fact that women are in clear support of this medium. If the views were extremely stereotypical and in turn restraining for women, theoretically they would reject women's magazines. This then discards the concept that all fashion and beauty texts are detrimental for women and simply represent patriarchal propaganda. Comparing contemporary magazines to those pre-1970s, the market has broadened in terms of genre, and there is now so much more choice available, meaning women can pick and choose, almost like a pick and mix, the type of information that they want to receive. Looking at the market this way, the position of women could be considered to be post-feminist, as there is a heavy emphasis on choice and availability. Plus, through the women's movement, there has been a rise of coverage on important political matters affecting both sexes. Therefore, the style of women's magazines has begun to alter slightly. Now I'm going to move on to the part of the presentation where I evaluate different magazine covers. Firstly, I'm going to compare some historical and contemporary examples of front covers of women's magazines. I will then go on to examine the front cover of another magazine, but this time it will be by itself. I chose to discuss the magazine covers as opposed to the advert content or story content because I felt like they were more meaningful and had a significant impact on the audience. The magazine cover is the first thing that the reader sees, therefore the messages that are portrayed would have been carefully considered by the editors, and for this presentation I found this interesting. On the first magazine cover there is a mother and what appears to be a young child, whilst on the second magazine cover the audience is presented with well-known pop singer Kylie Minogue. Considering both magazine covers are from the same company, they're very different in terms of style and appearance. The first magazine is from Good Housekeeping magazine in 1930, and it displays a transition from a time when women were held in a more conservative light. This is seen as the model is covering up a vast amount of her body. The focus on this image is of a woman and a child, highlighting a time in society where the woman's main expectation and role was to raise children and to stay within the family home. Therefore, the woman is very typically being represented as being inside the home and completing trivial tasks such as playing games with a young child, perhaps awaiting her husband to return from work. Beauty-wise, the woman can be seen to be very plain, along with the general backdrop of the image. This shows that during this time the woman's only valued role was to rear her children. The second magazine cover, taken from 2014, clearly places the female body at the centre point, whilst being displayed in a slightly flirty manner, perhaps aimed at men. Here the woman is the main focus, dressed in a fashionable and modern piece of clothing, revealing various parts of her body such as her shoulders, her arms and partly down her chest. The content focuses on a range of topics such as money, home design, fashion and cooking, for example. Although the woman is technically still represented as having interests inside the home, there has been a direction away from this as her sole purpose, as other interests come into play too, representing a transition from a stay-at-home mother to a multitasking, strong female who isn't defined by her family. And at this point it's worth noting as well that Kylie Minogue doesn't have any children, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman that has children, and an audience can relate to various members of society. With the Cosmopolitan magazine cover, the entire content is focused on sexual activity or perfecting the female body for performance, whilst a little blue badge in the corner orders women to stand up for a financial raise in the workplace, representing the lack of importance that this topic has for readers. If this topic had more importance, then perhaps it would take up a larger portion of the feature. From this it can be inferred that sexual pleasure and relationships with men, as well as appearance, are the main focus of the magazine cover, whilst also ensuring that the model suits the carefully scrutinised body ideals, by being slim, toned, beautiful and so forth. However, from the model's body language, it could be said that she has been positioned in a way that appears to be powerful and authoritative to the reader. This can be seen as she is looking directly at the reader and appears to be very proud by what she's demonstrating. Therefore, although the woman is not represented as being at home or submissive, she is being heavily represented as sexualised, which as a result becomes her main role of the picture. Here it can be understood how negative stereotypes of women can emerge from the influence of women's magazines, as the focus tends to be in the wrong place, and this is an example of that. It could also be said that this magazine cover does little to fight gender stereotypes. For example, the background and the appearance, as well as the style of the magazine, are very feminine by using colours like pink and red. In conclusion, it can be argued that women's magazines have often been guilty of reproducing negative representations of body ideals for women, restricting them in terms of personal expression to certain beauty ideals that at times are incredibly unrealistic and create pressure for women as a result. However, post-feminists may argue that women are active users of these texts and can feel empowered through the fact that they have choice in what they read and what they then take from the text, rather than being submissive women whose only role is to remain in the home and be sexualised for men. Typically, the covers still focus on the female body, creating a focus point for discipline in terms of beauty. However, a post-feminist stance may argue that through their strong influence, magazines can still divert reader attention to relevant feminist topics. In terms of advancement for women, thanks to groups like the women's movement, there has been clear progression in terms of women's voices, women being represented outside of the home and being in control of their own decisions. Looking at a magazine such as Good Housekeeping is fascinating because its whole theme centres around women keeping a good home. However, over the years it has transitioned to focus on other themes that represent women as strong, independent and intelligent. It also signifies them as individuals who are more than simply housekeepers or performers for men. However, women's magazines are still guilty of presenting beauty ideals, for instance. This can be seen in the example of the Cosmopolitan magazine, and many other magazines that use sex and beauty as the main interests of women. Furthermore, most magazine covers today appear to be glamorous, using lots of makeup and accessories to attract the reader, so this could be criticised for again creating pressure on women to conform to beauty ideals. but at the same time the magazines sell very well and appear to be very successful for women, so perhaps there is an element of entertainment that women do enjoy.